Hey everyone, I'm pro photographer Ian Plant, and in this video, I am going to take you behind the lens for an image I recently made in the Arizona desert during an epic thunderstorm. I'm going to share with you the technical and creative decisions that were critical to making this image. So if you want to learn more, then stay tuned. Okay, so this image Stormlight was taken in the White Pocket area of Vermilion Cliffs National Monument. And this is a fantastically sculpted sandstone area. It's one of the most beautiful sandstone areas in the world. There's lots of compositional opportunities. And while I was there, I spent several days in the area. I made a number of photos that I really like. I had some really good conditions, but I think this one, this Stormlight image, is my personal favorite. And so let's start off by talking about the equipment that I used to make this photo. So my camera is a Sony a7R5 camera, which is a full frame 60 megapixel camera. And the lens I used for this image was made by a company called Venus Optics, and it is a 10 millimeter lens. That is an ultra wide lens, so wide that I have to be careful because sometimes I find that I'm getting my feet or my tripod legs in my composition. And so I really love working with ultra wide angle lenses because they allow you to bring in lots of foreground and lots of sky at the same time. I used a PhotoPro Origin Plus carbon fiber travel tripod, so it's a lightweight compact tripod. And I find that a good sturdy tripod is essential for my landscape work because I need the support because I'm typically shooting on the edge of light. So sunrise, sunset, twilight, and I often have longer exposures. And so I want to make sure I get really sharp images, so hand holding is not an option. And I used a Delkin Devices black CF Express Type A media card to capture my photos. And because people are going to ask, Ian, did you use any filters? The answer is no, I did not use any filters when I made this image. So now let's talk about camera settings. I used ISO 100, which is the lowest base ISO for my Sony camera. And I do this because when you shoot at your base ISO, you're going to get the best image quality. You're going to minimize the appearance of digital noise, and you're going to also have the best dynamic range. And so I know that when I'm shooting at ISO 100, I'm going to avoid having digital noise that is going to degrade the image quality. So when I'm shooting landscape, I'm typically trying to shoot at that base ISO. I only increase my ISO if I need to get a faster shutter speed when I'm working in low light. And this might be an issue when I'm like photographing a field of wildflowers, for example, and there's a little bit of a breeze, and I need to keep that faster shutter speed. And so sometimes I need to raise my ISO to do that. But for a static scene like sandstone in the desert, I don't need to have those faster shutter speeds, so I'm working with my base ISO. Now, my shutter speed was 1/8 of a second, but that isn't set for any particular reason other than just trying to get the proper exposure for this scene. So I didn't set my shutter speed to capture any sort of creative effect. It's really just a byproduct of my other settings and the ambient light levels. And when I'm shooting landscape, I'm typically working with auto white balance. I'm letting the camera take its best guess at what the proper white balance should be. And if I need to make any adjustments later when I'm processing the file, I can do so without any penalty. When you change your white balance, when you're processing the raw file, you don't do anything to degrade the image quality. And I find that the camera usually gets the proper white balance most of the time. So setting the white balance to auto is actually a real time saver, and it's one less thing I need to worry about when I'm in the moment trying to capture the image. And my aperture was f8. And to get deep focus in this image so that everything looks sharp, I did a focus stack blend. And the reason I chose f8 is because most wide-angle lenses have their optimal sharpness from the center all the way out to the edges and the corners of the image frame at f8 or f11. So stopping down to f8 made sure that I got the sharpest image possible. It also gives me a little extra depth of field, which makes the focus stacking process a lot easier. So let's talk about the focus stack. So while I was in the field, I did a focus bracket. So I took 3 separate images and then I blended those images together later using Helicon Focus, which is a dedicated focus stacking program. And so here's where I focused for each image in the focus bracket. So the very first image I took was focused on the immediate foreground, and the second image I took was focused in the middle ground, and then the final image focused on the background. And for most of my landscape shots, that's all I need is 2 or 3 images, usually foreground, background, or foreground, middle ground, background. That's really all that you're going to need for most wide-angle grand landscape scenic shots. So in terms of the weather and the light, I took this image during the summer monsoon as a powerful thunderstorm swept by. And so in the American Southwest during the summer, you sometimes get what they call the monsoon. And basically it's this ephemeral event. It doesn't happen all the time. It's not going on all summer, though it can if you get really lucky. And it's caused by moist air coming up from the Gulf, interacting with the extreme heat that you often get in the American Southwest during the summer. Now, as I said, this is an ephemeral event. It doesn't happen all the time. I actually got lucky, so I had the monsoon 4 days in a row when I was visiting this area. And this photo was taken at sunset, and the light was coming in from the side. So this is side lighting on the landscape, and it's coming in from the right side. So basically, the clouds were blocking the light, and then right before the sun set, there was a gap in the clouds, and the light came through for about a minute. And it was soft, but it was colorful, warm light. And so that's painting the landscape with this faint reddish glow, which is enhancing the native color of the red swirls in the sandstone. And it's also helping to reveal some of the texture. So having that little bit of warmth on the foreground was really nice because it juxtaposes really well with the cooler tones of the clouds above, which were in shadow. And so the clouds are rendering as a blue tone in the final image, and that's creating this really nice color contrast between the sky and the landscape down below. And that's making the colors of the image seem more vibrant, and it's making the overall effect much more dynamic. And finally, let's talk about composition, which in my opinion is one of the most important aspects of landscape photography. So here I chose a near-far style of landscape composition. And this style often features an interesting foreground object that is juxtaposed with a scenic background. And I carefully chose a foreground that would lead the viewer's eye to the background scenery and to the sky above. So my foreground are some intricate swirls in the sandstone, and those swirls sweep around. They turn into a leading line that takes the viewer through the middle ground, points to the background, and that ultimately pushes the viewer up to the sky above. And so this foreground seamlessly transitions to the other parts of the composition and encourages the viewer to explore all of the visual design. So it's really important to choose a good foreground when you're making these types of near-far landscape compositions. And so that wide-angle lens allowed me to get really creative with the relative scale of the objects in the scene. And so the wide-angle view makes the background look smaller. And you got to be careful about that. If you're too far away from your background, it might look too small in the final image when you use that wide angle of view. So I happen to be relatively close to the background. So even with the wide angle lens, it's still prominent in the composition. But then I got really close to the sandstone swirls in the foreground, making them look much larger than they really were, making them look larger than the background. And this creates a narrowing of scale, a narrowing of perspective that helps pull the viewer's eye deeper into the composition. And it really makes that foreground stand out. It makes it much more prominent. And that wide-angle lens also allowed me to include a generous amount of the dramatic stormy sky above. And I really wanted to do that. I already talked about the complementary color scheme that the clouds introduced into the image, but there's also these really great shapes. There's these really nice swirls in the clouds that relate to the twisted shapes of the foreground down below. So always looking for an opportunity to unite sky and land in my compositions, to find a way to make the shapes relate to one another or mirror each other. So it's important to find a really good foreground leading to your background scenery, but it's also important to wait for really compelling skies that are going to work well with the other compositional elements in your scene. And so the weather is actually a vitally important part of the landscape composition. If you get the right clouds, you can bring the entire composition together and create something that is unique and that stands out from the crowd. So if you want to learn more about the creative decisions I made in the digital darkroom when I was processing the raw files for this image, then you're going to have to head on over to PhotoMasters. I've got a tutorial there that shares my digital darkroom workflow for this image, plus a few other of my White Pocket Storm images. And this tutorial is free for my Pro members and is available for a modest fee for everyone else. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have found this video helpful. I'm Ian Plant, wishing you good luck and great light. See you again next time. Bye-bye.